don't know exactly why Derek Black accepted Matthew Stevenson's first invitation to a Shabbat meal. Matthew, the host, was an Orthodox Jew, one of the few at New College of Florida, and Derek had recently been outed on campus as a white nationalist, heir apparent to the movement and godson to David Duke. Matthew extended the invitation as an act of Shabbat hospitality after he watched classmates ostracize his downstairs neighbor. And Derek came. And he kept coming because Matthew kept inviting. Over the course of 2 years, they shared every Shabbat, forging an unexpected friendship that eventually led Derek to publicly relinquish his white nationalists' views. Friends, the text we read this morning is about that kind of friendship. An unlikely, life-changing friendship between an Israelite woman called Naomi and her Moabite daughter-in-law, Ruth. Israel and Moab were uneasy neighbors, at times hostile. But when a famine overtook Bethlehem, Naomi and her husband Elimelech were forced to migrate, to cross over to the far side of the Dead Sea, to the land of Moab. Elimelech died there of uncertain cause, but their sons married local women, Orpah and Ruth, before dying themselves 10 years later, a tragedy summarized in a mere 2 verses. By the end of chapter 1, Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law have been left to fend for themselves, knowing that they will be more economically secure, given the culture of the time, if they could find new husbands. Naomi urges Orpah and Ruth to return to their families. She's heard that the famine has ended in Bethlehem, and so she herself prepares to travel back to her hometown alone. But Ruth famously refuses to leave her, uttering those passion-drenched, oft-quoted lines, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." It is a dramatic declaration of loyalty, one that would change both their lives. In the face of Ruth's determination, Naomi finally concedes, and Ruth goes with her back to Judah, where they settle near the land of one of Naomi's husband's relatives. Naomi, still bereft with so many personal losses, changes her name to Mara, which means bitter. To sustain them both, Ruth goes out into the fields every day to glean whatever wheat is dropped by the laborers as they harvest. This is how the 2 of them subsist, until the relative in question, whose name is Boaz, notices Ruth and asks after her. Naomi encourages this relationship, and eventually, 3 chapters later, Boaz marries Ruth and welcomes them both into his household, thereby securing the future of both women. Ruth has a son. They name him Obed. Mara, transformed by the birth of her grandchild, changes her name back to Naomi, which means pleasant. And Obed grows up to become the father of Jesse, who is the father of David, who would become eventually king. All of which makes Ruth the great-great-grandmother of the most famous monarch in Israelite history. What is it about friendship that has such power to transform lives? To turn a white supremacist into its opposite, to sustain Naomi through 3 heart-rending tragedies, and inspire Ruth to leave behind her own faith and kin, to follow Naomi to an unfamiliar land and embrace the Israelite God. The theologian Sally McFaig suggests that friendship is free in a way that other relationships are not. C.S. Lewis quips that friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art, like the universe itself. It is the one relationship that exists outside the bounds of duty, function, or office, says McFaig. One does not choose one's mother, and even falling in love seems to have a kind of destiny about it, but friends choose to be together. Of course, free does not necessarily mean easy. Well, Derek and Matthew shared a Shabbat table for over a year before they brought up Derek's work. It did come up eventually because the friendship demanded it. Derek couldn't continue to live with the contradiction that one of his closest friends was among those whose very humanity was denied by the ideology that he espoused. That unavoidably difficult conversation grew out of all those meals and the bond of trust that had gradually been forged between them. In Derek's own words, it wasn't just I'm angry and you're angry. Once we were quiet enough to talk about it, there were points to be made that white nationalism was incompatible with a free society. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard that. It wasn't the first time that somebody had told me that racism is bad. It was just the first time I'd been willing to listen to it. As for Matthew, he says, I think it's also worth pointing out that over those 2 years, I was legitimately friends with Derek, even when I frankly didn't know exactly where he stood. Friendship may be something that we choose, but over time, a genuine friendship has a way of taking hold of us, providing a kind of security that can empower us to take steps that we would not otherwise have taken. In short, friendship has the power to both stabilize and decenter us at the same time. All of this leads me to conclude that Derek and Matthew, Ruth and Naomi were modeling something that we urgently need. Friendships strong enough to lead us all across the modern day Dead Sea of political and cultural division. We say it all the time, that these days in which we are living feel particularly fraught, that differences feel so often unresolvable and the rift between our respective perspectives and experience too wide to bridge. Our impulse, too often, is to retreat into our respective corners, to go back to our own people, to surround ourselves with those who reinforce our own view of the world. Yesterday, I spent the day with a group of high school youth and their leaders up at Silver Lake Conference Center in Sharon, Connecticut. I was there as part of the Shine for Justice conference to co-facilitate an anti-racism training. And as part of that training, we invited the youth participants to map out their personal history and influences, to identify, if they could, where and how they had been socialized into the views that they had inherited. The exercise reminded me that many of us, though certainly not all, grow up around people who look and often think just like us. According to one study, white folks in particular tend to live in communities that are at least 70% white, and have friends that are 90% white. A Barna study confirms that people tend to be drawn to those who are more like them in general. Asked whether their current friends are more similar to themselves or more different from them in any number of areas, the majority always chooses most similar. This is true for religious beliefs, race or ethnicity, income, education level, social status, political views, and life stage. And yet, studies also show that friendship with those who are different from us increases empathy and causes a shift in views towards them in very positive ways. So here's what I conclude from all those statistics. From reading the story of Ruth and Naomi and hearing the story of Derek and Matthew, there is something deeply faithful, even God-inspired, about cultivating friendships across difference. One might even make the case that friendships are the foundation on which our faith is built, the one reliable way through the wilderness. Jesus says these words to his disciples shortly before he is arrested. "I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing, but I have called you friends." The people Jesus befriended over the course of his ministry included Jews from his own tradition, but also a Samaritan, fishermen and tax collectors, lawyers, women as well as men. Clearly, Jesus understood what Ruth and Naomi knew, what Derek and Matthew uncovered over time, that friendship, mutual loving kindness, has more transformative power than any hateful words or even our most stony silence. Beloved in Christ, you know this already, yes? We need friends, all kinds of friends, including friends who look different and think differently, friends who can show us what we would not otherwise see and lead us where we might not otherwise go. And I realize, as I preach this, that friends can be hard to come by. Many of us are lonely. Isolation is a chronic health concern in our country. You may know that firsthand. I believe that confronting the isolation that permeates our culture is part of the faith work to which we as a community of faith are called. And surely it begins by attending for our own longing for connection. If you don't know where to start, you might look around our congregation. Although friends can be hard to come by, you are surrounded here by friends and by potential friends. Folks of diverse experience and perspective, different age and varied cultural heritage. One of the few places in our culture where we have that mix of people all in one room. Perhaps we could practice with each other the art of eating together, of walking with one another in times of grief, of asking our curious questions and then listening across our difference. Perhaps if we do that often enough, we might discover or rediscover what it feels like for our relationships to matter more than those differences. We might recall again that loving kindness is more impactful than any of those hateful words, perhaps over time, here or in some corner of your lives. The friendships we choose might even embolden us to take steps that not only change us, but also transform God's whole world. Beloved, the first step is choosing. Freely choosing to make a friend. We do so trusting that the one who has been ever loyal to us, trusting in God, that most faithful of friends. For it is God who blesses us with the gift of friendship, and God who challenges us to take that next step, because God knows the only way to finally turn brokenness into healing, bitterness into joy, loss into new life is by reaching out a hand. Always, God urges us on with this assurance: wherever you go, I will go. Beloved, on this we can rely. The worship book used by our neighbor, Temple Israel, includes a prayer that I have always cherished. I offer it as a blessing on all our friendships, today and every day. It goes like this. Standing on the parted shores of history, we still believe that we are taught what we were taught before we even stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands and marching together. May it be so. Thanks be to God. Amen.